Welcome back to Football Weather. We're through week one of the college football season, and
sort of
week it was. Technically, it's like week 0, week 1, week 2, whatever. I guess technically that was the whole week, and the previous week were week 1 in the eyes of the NCAA. I never really can figure that out. But anyway, Galen, Clavio, Matt Blaszka joining you once again here on Football Weather. Happy to be with you once again. There is technically one more game going on, but you want to talk about a made-for-TV event. Like, I no offense to the fans of TCU and North Carolina, but if, obviously if Bill Belichick wasn't coaching this game would have happened at like noon on Saturday,
right?
As opposed to happening, in prime time on Monday. I'm always fascinated by this because obviously there'll be ratings because people want to watch it, but with neither of these teams, there's just nothing really to get that excited about. And I mean, neither of them are like terrible, but this is not a matchup that I think anybody's excited for, other than the fact that we'll see Bill Belichick on the sidelines like 6 times, probably more than that. Are they going to have a box up in the corner just showing him like at all times while he's coaching? I'm curious how they're going to overblow this production.
Yeah, I assume 6. It might be 6 in the first 15 minutes of this game, but I'm curious. They've done a good job in the past division or FBS or FC, whatever this FBS football, of having a good week 1 finish, and this is a really odd one. Like you said, it's certainly had to be moved here for this to make any sense, because this game is kind of like, we had a great week and we had a great game last night, and now we have to finish with TCU UNC, which doesn't really. I know TCU was in the national championship a couple years ago, but they've been pretty bad the last 2 years since. So it's going to be – I'll watch because it's football, but I'm not really that excited. Yeah,
I'm with you. It's one of those things where we'll watch it out of the gawking curiosity aspects of things, and that's about it. But, a lot of great football this weekend, a lot of interesting games and outcomes. We're going to dive into all of that and also preview what we've got coming up in this next week. We'll also unveil the beginnings of the Football Weather Merit Poll. We need to come up with a better name for that, but we've tried to rank teams based on what they've done, not what we think they're going to do. And so we'll talk through that a little bit later on in the show. First of all, quick reminder, we're brought to you by Home Field Apparel, your place to go for the finest in college fashions, the softest fabrics, the coolest designs. And they've still got a deal going right now if you are around and listening to this on the day that we're releasing it, a week 1 flash sale where you can get 20% off T-shirts. So go to homefieldapparel.com and check that out. They just released some Puff Ink trucker hats as well. They've got some new crew necks with the 3 lines on it. All this stuff looks really nice. But you got to go to homefieldapparel.com to go use that. Use the code HOME23, get 15% off your first order. Or just go straight there, get 20% off T-shirts today, Monday. So go ahead and take advantage of that. We'd love to have you folks head over there and let them know that we sent you. Let's go ahead and dive in, Matt, as we get going with the recap of week 1. So a lot of different games that we could concentrate on here. I think we got to start with that game that we saw last night, which was, for my money, the best overall game of the weekend, as Miami goes out to a relatively large lead and then hangs on and survives a relatively furious Notre Dame comeback. They kick a field goal. They stop Notre Dame on that last possession. They end up winning that contest. I feel like this game, it answered some questions about Miami while also creating some other questions about Miami, or maybe not answering questions, certainly about the defensive end and some of the game decisions down the stretch by Mario Cristobal. But all that said, I'm impressed by the fact they were able to beat Notre Dame. I don't think this is a game that they would have won last year. It's an important game for Miami because their schedule is sneakily harder than I think a lot of people might give it credit for. And this was a game where we were curious how Carson Beck was going to integrate with this offense. I didn't think he was awesome, but he made the right throws, although one he was incredibly lucky on. But it's a big win for them, and it's a loss that doesn't really hurt Notre Dame. And I think if you're Notre Dame, you've got to be pretty impressed with your new quarterback and the way that your team, at least physically, was able to hang and come back at the end of it and make it a game against Miami.
Yeah, I was pretty impressed with Notre Dame's ability to come back there with a freshman quarterback, first start in Miami, down 24-14. We can talk about Cristobal's decisions to basically kneel 3 times, it seemed like, for 2 possessions to give Notre Dame that opportunity to come back. But it was impressive from both standpoints, where I thought, like, kind of what you said here, Miami last year lost these games, or every game was really, their defense was really bad. Their defense really showed up in a big way. That last possession for Notre Dame when they're trying to score, Miami brought the house. They did not sit back. Like last year when they played that Syracuse game, if you remember, that really knocked them out of the playoffs. They were just sitting there, and Syracuse was picking them apart. That didn't happen today. Their front four was really dominant in a lot of instances today, and they ran the ball really well until they just stopped running the ball for some reason. It seemed like. What scares me about Miami, and it's going to scare me until Cristobal does it. It's the same issue at Oregon. He just seems to struggle when it comes to putting it all together at the end of these games. And I don't know what it is. I know they won last night, but that would still scare me as a Miami fan. Now, from the Notre Dame standpoint, we talked about this last night. While it's a 3-point loss on the roads, not a big loss. It's, a 3-point, it's fine. Their schedule does not lend them for a lot of opportunity to lose games. 10-2 is probably the minimum. Even that, they may have to go 11-1, depending on how things break. We talked about it in an earlier podcast where Boise State was going to be a big one. Well, they lost to USF on the opener and got blown out. They have A&M in 2 weeks. That's probably their biggest game. But really, they really need the Trojans to get ranked here in late October. But after that, it's going to be tough for them to do it at 10-2. They're going to have to go 11-1.
Yeah, and look, I think they'll go 11-1. I think they demonstrated that they've got the physicality and the level of play that they can sail through this schedule if they can get past that Texas A&M game next week. Texas A&M scored a bunch of points against UTSA, but gave up a bunch of points as well, only won by 18 at home. And then, like you said, USC, who knows? But that game's in South Bend. And that's the thing with Notre Dame. They're not really tested on the road again. They're at Arkansas. They're at Boston College. They're at Pitt. They're at Stanford. They're at Arkansas. Like, that's it. That's all they play away from South Bend the rest of the game. They might have one neutral site game, actually, now that I think about it. But it's a not challenging schedule. So I would anticipate Notre Dame, especially not having to play a conference title game, is probably 11-1 at the end of the year if they get this type of play moving forward. And like you said, with Miami, it's more complicated for them. They had to have this game. They got to host Florida. We're still not sure how good Florida is because beating Long Island is probably not a great barometer of anything, as you pointed out to me yesterday. But they go at FSU, which suddenly looks like it might be a challenge. They've got to go to SMU. They've got to go to Virginia Tech. Yeah, I think they can win all those games. But as you said, I would be nervous about Miami until we actually see them go through a whole 12-game schedule and not stumble down the stretch like they did last year.
Yeah, they have an easy game next week with between Cookman. But after that, they have UCF too, which obviously played really well against Boise State, so we don't know what to make of them yet.
USF, yes.
Sorry, USF. Sorry, excuse me, USF. And then you said the Florida State, Louisville, 3 straight games. Now there's 2 bye weeks in there built in, but that's going to really tell us where Miami is after that 6-game stretch, where they stand on October 17th, because the back end is a little easier. They do have to go to SMU, but after that, it is manageable for them to look at maybe 11-1 schedule, 11-1 season. Now, we don't want to project because I'll tell you what, my predictions this week were not great at all. But certainly Miami set themselves up now where they now have that big win in their pocket, which they didn't really have last year when they lost that second game. So now they have the opportunity to move forward.
Yeah. Looking at some of the other games, of course, the biggest game from Saturday in terms of rankings facing off against each other, Texas, Ohio State. Ohio State wins that game 14-7. And, this is an interesting one because obviously Ohio State won the game and Arch Manning was the real focus, and Arch Manning really struggled against what was essentially kind of a quasi-pro defensive set. But if you look at the numbers, and we try to do that on Football Weather, Ohio State's post-game win percentage in that game was only 18%. Like they should have only won that game 18% of the time. And while at the end of the day, the win is what matters, I think that I would be cautious about overreacting about Texas not being good, because a road loss at Ohio State, as we've said before, there's no shame in that. And I think ultimately Texas statistically played well. They bottled up Ohio State's offense pretty significantly. Ohio State made the plays they needed to make. I'm not taking anything away from them. They're number one in my merit poll this week. But I don't know that we learned necessarily that much out of Texas, other than they're going to have to do a lot of work to play against teams with the level of defensive talent that this team like Ohio State has. And the problem for Texas is they've got several of those teams left on the schedule this year. They got to go to Florida. They got to go to Georgia. A&M, I think, falls into that category. You could maybe make an argument for Oklahoma. Yeah. It's going to be interesting watching them kind of work their way through that schedule. They're going to have to do a lot of catching up in terms of playing against those types of defenses.
This was a hard game to watch, and I know you were at the IU game, so I'm not sure how much you actually caught of it. But while Ohio State, yes, their defense was incredible, and Patricia called up a great game plan. And we were listening to some of the post game yesterday. They only had 203 yards of offense, and they had 158 of those, 158 of those in 2 drives. So the rest of the game, it was pretty much nothing. And again, that's part of football. That happens. You're gonna have games like this, and we all knew Ohio State's defense was going to be ahead of their offense early on, just because they have 5 stars all over the place. And Julian saying it was his first start. Ohio State has now the biggest win of the season, right? And obviously it's week 1, and we assume Texas will be in the mix. Ohio State has a schedule where they're going to most likely be in the playoff, right? So they have an opportunity to figure this out. Texas does too, with 3 layups in the next couple of weeks. But after that, we were talking about this last night. Texas they still have Georgia, they have Bama, they have A&M. Like, there's no easy route to 10-2 or even 9-3, right? They have to win some of these games. You can't go 0-4 and claim we played a tough schedule. You have to win some of these just to get into the playoff. Yeah. With that said, I'm going to give Arch some grace here. First start playing against, basically, like you said, NFL defense, who was throwing coverage, says Adam, that, again, I'm not an NFL expert, but seemed like was way beyond what he was seeing on tape. I know he had 36 yards in the first 3.5 quarters, but he did turn it on late. And then he had a chance to at least tie the game late too. So there was some positives towards the end of that game for Arch. And again, he's getting propped up, and it's probably unfair that he's getting this. But when your last name's Manning, you're going to get it, right? So he has now an opportunity to maybe build off of the last quarter of this to help Texas get moving. But I'm a little concerned about Texas. Not as much for Ohio State, because they have a little more now wiggle room than Texas does.
Yeah. No, look, it's interesting because Ohio State's path is not like a murderer's row, but they got to go to Washington in a few weeks. They've got to go to Illinois. They've got Penn State at home. They've got to go to Michigan. Those are 4 pretty tough games the rest of the way. I don't know if Ohio State's win over Texas is actually the best win so far, because I would maybe argue that LSU has the best win so far, going into Death Valley and beating Clemson. But, I'm not taking anything away from Ohio State. The one thing I'll say is, if their offense isn't going to perform at a high level, I'm curious, like, if it didn't perform at a high level against Texas, was that because Texas was just really good? Or are there some lingering concerns with Ohio State's offense that we need to talk about? We're not going to know for a few weeks, and that's going to be an interesting thing to keep an eye on. Given the level of talent Ohio State has on their offense, I'm actually kind of surprised they struggled as much as they did against Texas. So again, I salute Ohio State, but I'm a little concerned about both teams, in as much as I don't know yet whether that was just first week, 2 really good teams playing against each other, or maybe there's some actual flaws in both teams that need to be evaluated against similar competition moving forward. So,
right. Yeah.
Let's talk about that. The game that I did say was maybe the best win. LSU going in to Clemson, knocking off the Tigers. A lot of people had Clemson as their best team, and yet they looked like they had a lot of the problems that they had last year, especially offensively. Now, again, really good competition against LSU. This is a game LSU hasn't won regularly over the course of time, so for them to pull it off is a really impressive thing. What do you make of this game and the outcomes from it? Like, did you have a big take-home point after watching this game?
My big take-home was LSU maybe the best team in the SEC. Just they physically dominated from start to finish. The score does not reflect that. They had a couple opportunities, a couple turnovers where I mean, that touchdown that wasn't a catch. I'm still not sure if it was a catch or not a catch. I have no idea what the rule is anymore. LSU looked like the better team. They look like the best team in that game. With that said, it's week one. We've seen teams like last year, USC beat them in week one, and USC stumbled the rest of the way. So, but in terms of talent, last year LSU couldn't stop anybody. They were one of the worst defensive teams in the country, not only in the SEC. So I do think that they fixed that. I'm now curious if now they can go into the SEC and now win a lot of these games. Now, if you were to tell me which team was the best team before the season, I would have thought Alabama was certainly the best team in the SEC.
Right.
We'll talk about them here in a minute. But LSU was very, very impressive going into Clemson opening night. They were down 10-3 at half, 10-3 at half, right? Yeah.
It was,
And to shut them out in the second half, Clemson couldn't move the ball in the second half, really. And they had the better quarterback, you would think, or maybe they're on the equal playing field here. But certainly, it was the same Clemson we've seen. They have not really risen to the challenge since 2018 when they had that run of winning these big games. It's been a while. Tom Allen, old friend of ours, certainly called a pretty good game, but offensively, I'm a little concerned that they're going back into their old ways of playing a very outdated offense.
Yeah, I mean, and much like Miami, Clemson moving forward, there's not a ton of really difficult games left on the schedule for them. So maybe more, actually, I should say Clemson more like Notre Dame here, where if you go down their schedule, they got to go to Georgia Tech, and I'm very curious all of a sudden about how that's going to go, but I think Clemson's a better team. They got road games at UNC, Boston College, Louisville, and South Carolina. South Carolina could be tough at the end of the season. The rest of their games, they have Florida State at home, they have SMU at home. They just don't have a lot of opportunities now to lose if they want to be in competition for an at-large bid in the playoff. But they've got a route here clearly to win the ACC, and they could go undefeated in the ACC, lose 2 non-conference games, and still be in good shape to win the conference title game. So that's going to be interesting to watch. And as far as LSU is concerned, I think it's very fascinating. You look at their schedule, and suddenly it doesn't look as daunting because their road games for the rest of the season in the SEC are at Ole Miss, at Vanderbilt, at Alabama, and at Oklahoma. And I'm having a hard time right now, especially with that Alabama result, looking at that and saying, well, that's going to be a tougher game than playing at Clemson.
Right.
So perhaps this is the pathway that you're talking about, because outside of that, I mean, their home games, they have Florida at home, they have South Carolina at home, they have A&M at home. They can't afford to stumble in those games. But
yep.
This is the consistency that has been lacking from Brian Kelly coached teams in Baton Rouge. If they're going to find it, they're off to a great start right now. They've given themselves a huge cushion as far as moving forward, at least in terms of at-large competition.
100%. And I was just going to mention their schedule as well. Like they have Ole Miss here in a couple of weeks. Like they could have 2 really big road wins before anybody really has 2 of them. So, and their schedules now, it sets up nicely. Certainly they have Florida in 2 weeks. We have no idea what to make of Florida after playing Long Island. That was a glorified scrimmage. So, and that could be a big game. We have no idea what to make of Florida. We don't have no idea what to really make of South Carolina a little bit, but that could be a tough one as well. You're right. I think this win gets LSU off the mat. This is maybe the jumping board for Brian Kelly to finally get the LSU Tigers where they probably want to be and should be.
Let's talk about Alabama, since we've mentioned them a couple times. They go on the road in a game they were favored in by 13.5 points against a Florida State team that was 2-10 last year, and they lose pretty convincingly, 31-17. They looked like they got physically manhandled by Florida State, which was just wild. They were missing tackles left and right. This didn't feel like one of those fluke games where Florida State just had everything go right for them. Like, this really did feel like Florida State was the better team out there. And that is not something I think anybody would have expected. You know, you go look at the post-game win expectancy, like Clemson had a higher post-game win expectancy against LSU than Alabama had against Florida State. Florida State finished that game at a 96.4% post-game win expectancy, which is pretty damn dominant. So this upends a lot of what people thought. And yet when you look at the stats, I think the thing that jumps out the most is Florida State rushed for 230 yards and 4 touchdowns in this game.
49 carries.
49 carries, almost 5 yards a carry. Yeah. Alabama rushed 29 times for 87 yards, a 3-yard per carry average. It's easy to say, well, Alabama won't face lines this good the rest of the year, but who on earth had Florida State's line as a good line coming into this year? I mean, it's possible that Florida State is suddenly a world beater, but it seems unlikely. Like, this seems more like a team that's like destined for 8 wins, maybe 9 if everything goes right. I mean, I sent you a stat that we got off the CFB Reddit earlier, which was just kind of mind-blowing. This was so Florida State was 2-10 last year. The second worst record for an FBS team that then goes and beats a top 10 opponent in their season opener next year. The last time this happened, Alabama was the victim then as well. They lost to a Georgia Tech team that had gone 1-9-1 the previous year. And then they beat Alabama in the first game, and they went on to lose all the rest of their games that year too. They were 1-10. So it raises a ton of questions about Alabama, but I also don't know if it necessarily means that Florida State is suddenly a playoff contender, because they have a pretty tough schedule the rest of the way. This is going to be one of those losses that could really weigh Alabama down if they get it back together again, and that may not be a foregone conclusion.
Yeah, I watched a lot of this game. Florida State, if you took the helmets off, you would have thought Florida State was the number 5 team in the country. They were utterly dominating up front. Like I said, 49 carries, and their old friend, the offensive coordinator, Gus Malzahn, who owns Alabama. He got 3 wins against them while he was head coach at Auburn, called the game. So it's very curious. Everyone was very skeptical of that hire because he really struggled at UCF. Sorry about the SF earlier. But you're right. It was a really impressive first game. Now, can they roll this into a 9-3, 10-2, be in the hunt for the playoffs? It's a wait and see approach. For Florida State. So their schedule the next couple of weeks lines up for them to get off the mat. Now, I'm not sure how East Texas A&M is getting all these games. They just played a top team last week too. And I didn't even hear that
this is going to fund East Texas A&M as a university for the next 25 years. I
didn't even know it was a university. So good. I mean, great for them for getting these games, but. So they have them, and they have Kent State, who has actually won a game against Merrimack this week, their first win in 2 years, and at Virginia, and then it starts to then they have Miami. So good chance for them to start 4-0, get off the mat, really kind of put last year behind. Everyone was waiting to see what happened to Florida State. And I do think they have the opportunity, but again, like you said, it's one game. They had all offseason to prepare for this. And certainly I think now the eyes now turn to Alabama and what they're going to do. Because they were utterly just outplayed. And certainly they're not going to get a test next week. I'm not saying they're going to get a test against Wisconsin, but certainly it does raise some eyebrows if Wisconsin can go in there and play with them a little bit. But after that, they got Georgia, they got Tennessee and South Carolina, and 3 of their next 5. So it doesn't get easier for the Tide. And not, as we talked about this last time, there's no way DeBoer is going anywhere with that buyout. But certainly that seat's going to get hot. And it's going to get really hot quick.
I wouldn't be. Emma was like, well, if they finish like 8-4 this year, if they're like, we'll just eat the money because we can pay it off at like $4 million a year, which would be insane, but it's also Alabama, so it wouldn't be surprising. But I do think on their front, like you said, you got to go to Georgia, you got to go to Mizzou, you got Tennessee at home, you got SC, you got LSU right after that, and you got Oklahoma, and then you still got to go to Auburn, who's, I mean, that there are like 3-4 additional losses potentially in that mix. It's going to be really fascinating. Yeah, with Florida State, my big question is going to be, are they able to sustain? They've got to go to Miami. Excuse me, they got Miami at home. They got to go to Clemson. They got to go to Florida State. And then they've got the mid-level games that I don't think you can take for granted with a team that went 2-10 last year at Virginia, who looked okay this past week. They've got Virginia Tech at home. They've got at NC State. They've got Pitt at home. There's just a lot of games where I don't know how much we can trust them. They're not going to be as up for it emotionally in future games as they likely were for this Alabama game. So a lot of really fascinating results from that first week. I think the only other ones that I would note that were, really particularly interesting, Tennessee, big win on the road, big win at home as they were playing neutral site, against Syracuse, but a big win against a big, an ACC team. Auburn, big win on the road as they went in and beat Baylor. Baylor, probably a 6, maybe 7 win team, I'm guessing, this year. Utah goes in and just smacks around UCLA, which has some interesting implications for how good UCLA might be. Yeah. And then South Carolina I would not call it a terribly impressive win against Virginia Tech, but they did pull away in the fourth quarter after some early troubles offensively. But that's still a nice neutral site win for South Carolina. So any other games worth noting from that first week for your perspective, Matt?
Yeah, I was just going to mention maybe some of the other out-of-conference ones here that were in the Power Four. Georgia Tech going to Colorado on the road, winning that game. Certainly, we have no idea what Colorado's going to be. Maybe they're just a bowl team this year, 6 wins. But go on the road's not easy, right, on the first game, the first big night of the year. So that was a nice win. And the other one that I think we didn't mention was Nebraska. It was an interesting game. They won. It was not impressive at all. They almost blew at the end. But certainly for them, they've lost those games the last 3 years, like consistently. So certainly, if we're looking just at the out of conference, just some of the records I was sharing with you earlier, the ACC was 3-3 this weekend. The Big Ten was 2-1. The Big 12 was 1-3. The SEC was 4-2. The Notre Dame was 0-1 with 1 game left to play. So certainly not a lot to make there, but the 2 biggest losses were from the SEC side. So. Yeah. That's something to note as we go forward. As we know, they like to play hypothetical matchups, the SEC, so we'll see how that goes forward, especially with Alabama, the team that everyone was crowning the national champions last year.
Yeah, Nebraska, they've got a nice run of 4 games in a row at home coming up, although one of those is against Michigan, and that's going to be an interesting challenge. And then you get into the meat of their schedule, and there's frankly not a lot on the bone there. I mean, they have a relatively straightforward schedule. Their most challenging games the rest of the way, you could say, are Michigan at home, at Minnesota, and at Penn State, and I guess Iowa to close out the season. The thing with that Nebraska-Cincinnati game is I think Nebraska's post-game win expectancy was only 36%. Like, Cincinnati actually kind of dominated that game statistically. You're right. Nebraska needs to win those games, and they've got to feel good about winning that game. But I wouldn't take too much home out of that other than they happen to win a game on a neutral field. Good for them. But, that now it's like, can you beat Michigan at home? And if they can do that, I think that their season opens up significantly in terms of what the potential could be.
Right. And as we've talked about, Nebraska's been waiting for something to be excited about. So maybe this gets them moving in the right direction and start maybe closing out some of these close games that they haven't closed out.
Yeah. So let's talk quickly about our merit polls. We're trying just to base on largely what we've seen out of teams and what they've accomplished. So wins are getting priority. We'll give some credit for close losses if they're in circumstances where you would expect it to be a close loss. But the idea is we got to redo this every week, essentially. We're trying to avoid falling into the trap of just ranking teams because we think they're good. So I'll just give you my top 10 based upon what we've seen over the course of these first 2 weeks. I've got Ohio State, LSU, Miami at 3, Penn State at 4. I hate giving them that much credit for beating Nevada, but they looked pretty good while doing it. Georgia 5, Texas 6, Tennessee 7, Notre Dame 8, Clemson 9, and Auburn 10. And then right outside of that, I've got Utah, South Carolina, Utah, South Carolina, Iowa State, and Tulane. What do you have at the top?
Yep. I have Ohio State 1. I went back and forth with LSU, but just with everything around surrounding Ohio State, and they're the national champs, I gave them the edge there. So Ohio State 1, LSU 2, Miami 3. I put Texas 4. We're going on the road. That's a tough one. So, and then I went Georgia, Penn State 5 and 6, both dominant wins. It's the one instance where I gave them the benefit of the doubt from last year. It's the only instance because I'm like, you got to put them somewhere. They're not out of the top 10, right? So they're 5 and 6. I put Clemson 7. I thought Notre Dame would be 8, Tennessee 9, Auburn 10, Iowa State 11, and then I did a group of 5 spot. I put WKU 2 as that group of 5 spot with Tulane, USF, and App State on the outside. And then I think we had the same next 5 as well, or 4, whatever it is. As we talked about, after you get past a couple, it's really hard to really decipher with only one game. Some have 2, but it's really difficult at this point. We'll be able to have more data as we go forward.
And we'll have a graphic as we move forward with this.
Yeah.
But, so this is just kind of a straw poll more than anything else, because I think you need 2-3 weeks to really get a sense of who's who. And again, I went back and forth on Ohio State being the team that
Right.
you would rank number one, because I do think LSU's win was more impressive being on the road. But given that Texas was number one and given that Ohio State managed to kind of grind that out defensively, I felt fairly good about it. But we'll see. And again, it's one of those things we're going to go back. Our number ones and our top 5, top 10 might change significantly from week to week as we do this. So you can keep us honest out there if you're following along about who you think is actually tops in the country. And we'll see how it syncs up with what's going on out there in the polls, which I don't think we're getting our first poll until tomorrow morning anyway. So
yeah.
One other thing I wanted to note, and this is, it's one of those things where we're going to talk a little bit about Indiana, given that we both cover Indiana and live very close to it. A lot of their fans upset. And I think, several fans were like, well, they shouldn't be ranked because they only beat Old Dominion 27-14. This is one of those games and one of those representative situations where sometimes it's hard to tell exactly how much faith to put in the final score. Like there's like 3 different gates. There's like who won, which has to be the first thing, because that's really ultimately what matters in college football. Then second, what were the statistics like in the game? How dominant was a team? And then what was the execution like in terms of the scores? So Indiana wins 27-14, but if you watched the game and you paid attention, like they should have probably won by about 3 touchdowns more. There were a variety of things that happened that were out of character for that team. I also think it's worth bringing up that most of the Big Ten struggled in their first games this week in terms of dominance from a wins perspective. So you look across the board. So, for instance, Washington, they beat Colorado State, but they only beat them by 17 points. And Colorado State, I don't think is that good this year. Michigan, who everybody was really impressed by Bryce Underwood, they only beat New Mexico by 17. I don't think that's a particularly good New Mexico team either, and that was in the Big House. You've also got the case, obviously, of Nebraska, who we talked about earlier, who had a losing post-game expectancy at the end. Iowa beat Albany, who's not even an FBS team, but looked really, really bad offensively, doing it in terms of throwing the ball. Their rushing game was very good, but this is the issue for Iowa, where it's like they're not just going to be able to survive off their running game. We've seen them try to do it in the Big Ten before. It's just not a sustainable model. And meanwhile, then you've got teams like Oregon, who blew out Montana State, or USC, who blew out Missouri State. Those are not apples to apples comparisons to playing Colorado State or Old Dominion. And so it can be very unclear at this time of year who's actually accomplished something in week 1 or week 2 versus who has not. I think it's going to be interesting to see what happens with all that moving forward. There's just not enough data to really get a clear sense of things right now.
Right. I think it's important to remember it's important just to get off the mat. And as you said, the first stat that matters is winning. So as long as you get that out of the way, no one's going to remember this final score, right? They're going to remember that was the first game of the year. Now, if you're Northwestern, not that they were going to have a playoff season, they lost on the road to a group of 5 team. North Dakota was a minute away from upsetting Kansas State. They're an FCS team. So these things do happen early in the season. NIU beat Notre Dame last year, right? So it's and Kurt Signetti, and obviously we're going to use him as the reference point. He says the Sun Belt, they have given us problems. We have to win this. Just win the game, and we'll figure everything else out as the season goes on. If you actually watch the IU game, they were probably 30 points better. There was 2 broken plays that had the 14 points for Old Dominion, right? So And I didn't watch all the other games closely, like the Oregon game and all those things. I'm sure there was those plays as well that happened when they got scored on. Those things are going to happen because you're trying to figure things out. That same thing goes for and I'm just using Alabama. Maybe the same thing goes for Alabama. They had a really bad game, but that's what we need to retrain our brains for, just as college football fans, that one loss is not define your season anymore. Before, like 2 years ago, Alabama's probably done, right? I mean, there's no way they're running the table. Now you have an opportunity to have a mulligan, maybe 2, and you can still make a playoff, and you can get better as the season goes on, like Ohio State did last year, like Notre Dame did last year, and have those opportunities to still get to the playoff and make some noise. So as fans, yes, maybe not happy with the result. Maybe we'll drop in the rankings, but the rankings are not going to be the be-all, end-all when it comes to December and November.
So let's look ahead to week 2 as we kind of enter our final stretch here. of this episode of Football Weather. We'll start off with the ranked games. I feel like week 2 is always a tremendous letdown every year.
There's not much.
And there's not a whole lot. I mean, I don't think there's a single ranked on ranked team, at least with the current polls. That could change obviously when the new poll comes out. But just running through and looking at I take that back. There's one. Michigan, Oklahoma, which is going to be one of the night games. That'll certainly be one worth keeping an eye on, because I'm not sure how good either of those teams is at this point. Yeah. But you go through the rest of the schedule. There's games I won't even mention. That's how bad they're likely to be. Illinois at Duke is going to be an intriguing one. That's a noon game on ESPN. You've got Baylor at SMU. I'm more interested in that to see how good SMU is. I think we've gotten a fairly good sense that Baylor's okay, but probably not much better than that. Iowa State is always an intriguing one, but I think I'm concerned if I'm Iowa going into that game, given that Iowa State, they didn't look great in that win against Kansas State. They had a low post-game win expectancy, but then they were pretty good this past week. And Iowa, while they won against Albany, that was not the type of warm-up game you would like to see. You've got Oklahoma State at Oregon. That looks like a sacrificial lamb kind of situation. You've got Ole Miss at Kentucky. Kentucky did beat Toledo, which was an open question this week. But if Ole Miss is really a playoff contender, they can't afford to lose to Kentucky like they did last year.
Right.
And then going through the rest of the schedule, Arizona State at Mississippi State. Mississippi State did have a nice win on the road in Hattiesburg this week against Southern Miss. I don't think they're going to be good, but I also do have some questions about how good is Arizona State really versus how much was that a flash in the pan kind of season last year. We might find out some things as they have to head into to Starkville and play the Bulldogs.
Yeah, that'll be an interesting one. I mean, Mississippi State was really bad last year. So hopefully they can have a better season. But yeah, we'll be interested to see if Arizona State can continue their magical run from last year to keep it going. One other game that I think that we missed was Missouri. Missouri, but Missouri's kind of hard to figure them out. Kansas they had a lot of, like we said earlier in a couple episodes earlier, that they had a lot of close losses. This used to be a really big rivalry game back before they changed conferences. Kansas, this is a big win, a big one. If they can get the 2-0 and win over the SEC, and maybe puts them in the mix with maybe the Iowa States. And as you already mentioned, Iowa State, and it should be noted, Iowa State had to come home and play a game this week, and so did Kansas State. Kansas State did not look great. Iowa State blew out South Dakota, who is going to be an FCS national title contender. So really, really impressive win for them. I am bullish on Iowa State more than I was 2 weeks ago, just to see them and how they played.
Yeah, I think it's going to be fascinating, that Missouri-Kansas game, because Kansas is 2-0. Now, that's not come against great competition, but that's going to be a great atmosphere. I think tickets are over $200 for the get-in price at Memorial Stadium, so it's going to be interesting to see how that goes. Some other ones of note that didn't necessarily involve two ranked teams or even one. Well, Florida, South Florida, I am somewhat intrigued by. I'm assuming Florida is going to win that game, but that is one that might have some interest to it. You've also, winding through, we talked about Western Kentucky. They're traveling to Toledo to play this week. That is a game that could be kind of curious, because Toledo, I think, will be a team that can contend in the MAC, obviously. But Western Kentucky's off to a pretty good start, albeit against some lower level competition. And winding through the rest of it, Vanderbilt at Virginia Tech is somewhat interesting. Boston College at Michigan State. I'm more interested there because Michigan State did not have what I would call a wonderful game against Western Michigan. Aiden Childs was graded very low in that game. So that could be an interesting barometer about where the Spartans are. UCLA at UNLV. UNLV has looked okay, average, but UCLA looked really bad in that game versus Utah. I do wonder how they play on the road trying to come off of that loss. So a lot of interesting things sprinkled into the schedule, but really more interesting for folks like you and me who are interested in the margins. There's not a lot of premier quality games to watch this time around.
No, and it's like I said, week 2, as they try to really get the season going, it's almost like they know the NFL's starting, so they don't want to have as much going on this week to get the ball rolling. But this is a week where you're going to have a lot of maybe quote unquote upsets alerts. You're going to have people be texting each other, "Hey, this team's up against this team. USF's beating Florida, or whatever it's going to be." I'm looking forward to it. Like I look forward to every week in college football, but certainly this is a week where it's going to be a little light on big matchups.
Yeah. We will keep an eye on things throughout the course of this week. And obviously, it always feels like the first few weeks of the college football season are weeks where we're just trying to figure out what's going on. And we're just trying to figure out like how much did we think that we knew, how much of it was true, how much of it was false, and how much do we need to recalibrate our expectations around certain teams depending on the circumstances that they find themselves in. So we will be along with you for the ride on that. Matt, any final thoughts before we wrap up?
Just been a great weekend of football. Like we said, it's not the most intriguing matchup tonight, but watch. It's football. We now have a Monday night game for the next, for the rest of the year, whether it's the NFL or college football. But I'm excited for week 2.
Yeah, I'm excited as well. We're looking forward to seeing how it all goes, and we'll keep you posted here on Football Weather. Be sure to subscribe on Spotify or follow us on the Back Home Network YouTube channel, as we will be bringing you podcasts throughout the course of the season, keeping up on what's going on as all of these teams chase college football playoff bids. Plenty of football to be played still. For Matt Blaszka, I'm Galen Clavio. This is Football Weather. We'll catch you folks on the flip side. So long, everybody.